So I just read the book, The One Device, and this book was basically all different facts about, you guessed it, the iPhone, not the smartphone. This is all about the iPhone, not about Apple, all about just the iPhone. The reason for that is because it's the highest selling product in history. It was introduced in 2007, and already, only 11 years, it's the highest selling product in history, and it probably was well before that, at least 2 years. So basically, when they were developing this, the cleaning crews were not allowed to service the rooms where it was being worked on because it was so secretive. Anytime they took the prototypes, these little tiny things, it's just like black glass, you can't even see what it is. Anytime they moved that, they took a dark black cloth and they would move it under that to the next department, almost like a magic show. Like, it was that secretive for, I don't think, any good reason, but I guess at the time it was that revolutionary. Now, it actually wasn't the first smartphone. The first touchscreen was made in 1965, and the first smartphone was made a couple decades later, but still way earlier than the iPhone. So Apple bought Fingerworks, which was a company that made touchscreens for people with disabilities in their hands where they couldn't type on a keyboard, so they would need it. And I think a lot of innovation starts from the people who physically can't do things, and so we make a better version and then we say, wait a minute, that's probably better for everyone. Another thing I thought was really interesting is when Apple was making their touchscreen, they took their monitor's view and they turned it into a projector. So then they projected that onto the trackpad to mimic what the touchscreen would look like, and I just thought that was really clever. The original plan for the iPhone was actually to make the iPad. So it started out as an idea to make a tablet, as we know it today, but then they said, no, let's make it a phone. So really, the iPad was invented before the iPhone, which I never knew, and I bet most people would not know either. So they still didn't know if they wanted a music player that made calls as like an accessory, or if they were going to go with a mini computer. Now, it seems obvious today, a music player that happens to make calls, a music player that would make calls would be sort of like a cheap electronic today, something you would maybe buy as a novelty and, not actually use the way it was intended to be used. So, of course, they went with a mini computer, and that was a revolutionary decision. They talk about convergent technology, where, the iPhone itself was an amazing invention, but really all of the parts to it already exist. And I feel like a lot of people don't realize that's how pretty much everything is invented. Nothing is just made out of nowhere. No ideas are made in a vacuum. Like, everything is, this thing exists, and this thing exists, so let's put it together and make this. And then that thing together with another thing makes another thing. So it's a lot of things where they already exist. You just take these ideas, take these concepts, take this technology, and you kind of put it together, and all of a sudden you have that light bulb, and it's a revolutionary product in that way. So while they were working on it, they also did many different split tests, which is where they have one team do one thing, one team do another, and see what comes out best. One example of that was they had the touchscreen idea, or a scroll wheel idea, like they had on the iPod. So that would be kind of interesting. That was sort of like a rotary telephone, where you would use the scroll wheel to dial the numbers, like as if it's 1940 again. So luckily, they ended up picking the futuristic, for the time, touchscreen, which the touchscreen was invented in 1965. So not so much, but it was a good idea nonetheless. So they had to use all this different technology from all these different companies. Samsung actually made the first computer chips for the iPhone, custom just for Apple. Now Samsung doesn't exactly like Apple. Corning made the first glass. They actually invented Gorilla Glass, which is like the shatterproof glass, but they had no market for it. They knew it was a good idea, but they had no one to sell it to. So they just kind of shelved that idea, and then Apple came along, hey, do you have something like this? Oh yeah, we got you. So they also use thousands of miners, including children, to extract all of the tin and other materials that they need. And there was a lot of accidents and deaths, which is not a good thing. They also use Foxconn, which is a manufacturing company in China that employs 1.3 million people. Their main factory is in Shenzhen. They actually use more than just this one company. They have a couple different contractors who make their phones for them. Now, shifts are 12 hours here. Suicides are common, so Apple tries to use PR tactics to combat this and say oh, we're investing in workers' well-being through this other Chinese group. But really, they know what they're doing. So when the iPhone was first presented in 2007 at Macworld, it didn't work. They actually had to fake everything that they were showing the audience. Things that they were going to do, but did not work at the time. So it had tons of bugs, and they just faked it all and said, look how great this thing is. And then that didn't really matter, because by the time it was actually launched, they had fixed the entire thing. And in the first 30 hours, over the weekend, 270,000 units were sold. After that, though, sales actually weren't that great. And the reason was Apple wanted their own apps to be the only apps in the App Store, with one exception being Google, because Apple didn't plan on making the Maps app. So they were using Google Maps and then pretty much all their own apps. But then what happened was hackers entered the App Store, put their own apps in there, people started downloading them, and they loved it. And that actually became the biggest draw to the iPhone, when Jobs said, okay, clearly people want this, and he finally allowed independent people and companies to come in and make apps, and it wasn't just Apple anymore. Now the App Store alone is a multi-billion-dollar market for developers, and I'd say it worked out pretty well. Pretty much Apple is known for one main product, the iPhone, and they just recently became the world's first trillion-dollar company, I think within the last month or two. Amazon actually just tied them at $1 trillion as the second trillion-dollar company. But Steve Jobs died in 2011, and it wasn't until 2018, so 7 years after he died, that his company was still successful enough to go on and become the world's first trillion-dollar company. So I think that's pretty impressive. Pretty much all off of one thing that we know them for today. Obviously MacBooks and iPads, but basically all based on the success of the iPhone is why the company blew up to the size that it is at today. They also have the most cash on hand of any company. And that is about all there was from the book. So the main lessons were inventions are basically just taking technology that already exists and putting it together, and then basically using just a little bit of creativity in doing so, and that is enough to make one of the most revolutionary things ever in history. So there was really nothing that unique about it. You just have to find different ideas, see how they fit together, and make it happen. This could have been how you made a call on your iPhone. I'm glad we have touch screens instead of scroll wheels.